Selectman O'Saver. How do we get Reid and Bonner to pass bills? Can we do a national recall of them?
Well, here's the, that's a great question. The question was, how do we get Reid and Boehner to pass bills? Both individuals who I want to say off the top I have great respect for. But they both operate in different spheres and under different pressure. Let me start with the Senate first. And in one example, I think I can make the point. We all know what happened at Sandy Hook. I don't know how many of you know Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin is the most conservative Democrat in the United States Senate. He's from West Virginia. Some of you may know Pat Toomey. He's from Pennsylvania. He's a classmate of mine. He's the president of the Club for Growth and the most conservative Republican, arguably, in the Senate. Well, Pat and Joe got together. You may recall that Manchin very poignantly got up. Now, he's a West Virginian hunter. In fact, he campaigned, you know, and very much a part of the NRA, and said, they're killing our babies. We got to do something. And Toomey agreed. So you have the two most conservatives. I'm not talking about Dianne Feinstein and
Ted Cruz.
Lugar, or no, Lugar's no longer there, or
Tom Cruise.
yes, thank you. And but these are two conservatives that came up with a compromise. And the compromise that was, well, supported by 91% of the American people and 76% of NRA gun holders. It had to do with background checks, to making sure, background checks. I'm not talking about anything radical here. I'm talking about background checks to make sure that people who are ill or who are criminals don't get their hands on guns. I mean, I don't know, that doesn't sound to me like depriving anybody of their rights, but you know what the vote was on that? Well, you know that there's 100 members of the United States Senate. You probably were aware, or maybe recall, that the families of Sandy Hook, in fact, were sitting in the Senate gallery. The vote was 57-43. The bill failed. Where did you learn that? In high school or in the 5th grade? That 57-43, the bill loses. It lost on what they call a cloture vote. A cloture vote is a Senate procedure. As my son said, Dad, is that in the Constitution? No, it's a Senate rule. He said, but you got 57 votes. I said, that's right. They said that Obama can't lead, but he only has 51 senators and he got 57 votes. I know. It's a Senate rule that needed to be changed and wasn't. And so the Senate can exercise this 60-vote rule that stops legislation from going forward. In the House of Representatives, it's by majority rule. But the majority can prevent any bill from being taken up. So in the House of Representatives, the bill isn't taken up, and in the Senate, it was blocked by a cloture vote. 57-43. Do you have any idea how many deaths have taken place through gun violence since Sandy Hook? Take a guess.
Tends to be 30,000 a year are dead from firearms in the United States.
This was 5,000, but as it relates to gun violence in our city, not specific deaths through firearms overall, but,
Yeah.
and you know, of course, we all saw what happened in Maryland just over this past weekend. Now, let's be clear as well. There's also issues with the mentally ill, that the issue has to be approached comprehensively. But are you kidding me? We can't sit down and work this out and say, yep, this is how we need to strengthen the mental health system. This is what we need to do to assist a number of these kids in trouble and tag these things before they happen. This is what we're going to have to do with respect to so many people returning from the theater of war who've experienced post-traumatic stress and have a number of issues that in this country we just as soon sweep under the table instead of addressing it. But can we not sit down and say, look, there ought to be universal background checks, and we ought to make sure that the health care, the mental health care that's required is met out there. And to me, this doesn't seem like it's really radical thinking. Seems to me rather pragmatic, common sense, what we ought to be doing as a Congress and as a nation to solve the problem. So, your question was, Reid, well, in the Senate, as we saw with Ted Cruz, anyone can get up and also hold a bill or say they're going to create a filibuster. So I have no problem with filibuster, provided, go ahead, get up and talk for as long as you want, but after you talk, let's have a vote. And then let's let the majority prevail. So that needs to be reformed. Otherwise, you're just going to continue to have 57-43, the bill loses. And the American people get cheated. And in the House of Representatives, you need to have majority rule as well, but the majority, in order to respect the rights of the minority, has to allow a vote. As I said to the speaker, listen, you may vote this down, that's your right, that's your prerogative. People may feel strongly against it. Well, okay, vote it down, that's your obligation, but isn't there a responsibility, whether it's, in this case, gun violence, but how about a jobs bill? You don't like the president's jobs bill? Okay, vote it down. We brought up the Affordable Care Act 49 times and they voted that down. Why not be able to bring up legislation? We couldn't even bring to the floor legislation on the unemployed to say, listen, take the subsidies from the ag bill that have been bipartisanly agreed on and use a portion of that to provide unemployment. Would anyone here not vote for that? All right, well, you wouldn't, but and that's your prerogative because it's a democracy. A democracy. So, well, that's why in the House of Representatives there's elections every 2 years. And the Senate, a little more difficult. Only a third of the body is up every 2 years. And of course we elect a president every 4 years. But it always, as we learned in high school, whatever, problems of democracy, most importantly, require citizen involvement. I give the Tea Party a lot of credit. You know why? They get their citizens involved. They get them involved. I may not agree with them on all issues, but I appreciate their commitment. And they are very principled. I believe wrong-headed, but principled. When you stand up and say to New Jersey, New York and Connecticut after Sandy that you don't get any relief, emergency relief, unless it's paid for. But you say, wait a minute, none of the hurricanes in the south, none of the tornadoes in the west, none of the fires, etc. Those are emergencies that nobody can pay for, that no one plans for. They said, well, no, those are wealthy states, they need to pay for those first. 67 of them voted against relief. And said it, quite frankly, not to me, to their fellow Republicans, Peter King and Michael Grimm and Rodney Frelinghauser and Frank Lobiondo from New York and New Jersey all got up and said, hey, wait a minute, it's our communities, we've been struck. Now, on one hand, you could say, well, they were very principled. It's the American people here that were being hurt and needed the help and the assistance, and that's what governments do. But that's the problems that we face. Yes, Dave?